Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, and distinguished participants, on behalf of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, welcome to our webinar series, Universal Declaration of Human Rights at 75, Advancing Freedom of Religion or Belief. Today, in our third and final episode of our series, our distinguished speakers will consider the future of Article 18 and generate concrete objectives and goals to help strengthen freedom of religion or belief, or FoRB, and human rights, looking toward the 100th anniversary of the UDHR in 2048. Our guests are some of the preeminent thought leaders in this area. First, we will hear from our keynote speaker, Elder Jack and Gerard, General Authority 70, a member of the European Central Area Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Elder Gerard's remarks will be followed by an engaging panel featuring Dr. Nazila Ghanea, Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief from the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, and Dr. Andrea Benzo, Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief and Interfaith Dialogue from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy.
Before we jump into the discussion, a few housekeeping items for everybody. This webinar is being recorded. The recording and a summary will be shared through our mailing list after the fact. So if you don't quite catch everything, you'll be able to catch it later. If you want to receive those, make sure you sign up for the link at the link that will be shared in the chat. At the end of the discussion, we will take questions from you. You may submit them at any time using the Q&A tool located at the bottom of your screen. In fact, we encourage you not to wait till the end. Please be concise, and we will sift through those and present some of those questions to our presenters. Please keep an eye on the chat for additional information or links. For example, we'll be posting more complete bios of our speakers in the chat box. And finally, as with all of our webinars, the opinions and views expressed during this episode are those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent those of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So without further ado, we will give the floor to Elder Jack and Gerard.
Well, thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Francesco. It's a real privilege and pleasure to be with you today and representing the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. As Francesco and Ryan mentioned, I'm currently serving in what we call the Europe Central area, where we're responsible for over 33 nations that comprise the better part of Europe and also part of Eurasia. So we're humbled to be part of this. I also want to acknowledge all of our friends, not only Dr. Ghanea and Dr. Benzo who are with us today, but many of the others who are with us who have been part of earlier webinars, earlier broadcasts, and perhaps most importantly, the ongoing effort as we consider matters of religious freedom or freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, and human rights, human dignity for all humankind. So we're honored as members of our church and our faith to be part of this very crucial topic. We know there's been a lot of groundwork, a lot of effort has gone into this, not only to this webinar, but many other efforts around the world. As we're talking about the future as to perhaps where we go from here, having looked at the past, some of the philosophical underpinnings, the legal intricacies, we can now look at the richness or the fullness, if you will, of all that's been discussed in the past and say, therefore, what, as I like to say, where do we go from here? What do we do next? But equally important, how do we continue the momentum? In some of our canon of scripture, we reference this time and this space of those of old who've talked about it, and they oftentimes say, but there were few in the initiative or few in the effort. And as we look at ourselves, sometimes we say, well, there's a handful of us, or there's hundreds of us, thousands of us throughout the world, and still in light of the world's multi-billion population, there's still but a few. Yet those few are very significant in the positive influence we can have on our culture and on our society. There's probably never been a more appropriate time for us to continue to advance the freedom of religion, the freedom of thought, of conscience, and to demonstrate perhaps a model for the world, mutual respect and understanding. Truly a recognition of human rights, human dignity, and how we treat each other in such a way that we can all live in harmony, even though we may have very different opinions on faith, on God, on culture and how we live in this world in which we all share, even as it continues to grow and as it continues to flourish. When I think of it from our perspective, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we have a number of underlying, if you will, doctrinal foundations that underlie our engagement in this work and why we believe it is so important. The first is, I would just mention, and I think it's very important to reflect on why we will not only be engaged, but we continue to enhance our engagement or to increase it, is because we literally believe that all of us are children of a loving God. And therefore, we should be mutually respectful of each other, our views, our opinions, regardless of our religious faith, regardless even of our political ideologies or ethnicity or where we've come from or what our life experience may be. We believe that all humankind are equal, because in the eyes of God, we're equal regardless of those origins or those identities. And because of that, we share one identity in common, and that is children of a God who loves us. And from our faith perspective, from our vantage point, he desires only the best for us. And yet, as we work together, as we learn to be more understanding, we're able to get along better, to have a civil society or culture, if you will, with its great diversity, yet to enjoy it one with another, to bring peace, to bring safety, to bring comfort to all humankind. The second principle that underlies our involvement that we think is very important moving forward is what we call moral agency. We believe part of our Heavenly Father's great plan is that we have the right to choose. For example, we choose every day what we will do. We choose every day what we believe, what our faith is, what our understanding is. And this principle of moral agency requires us in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to be mutually respectful of people who have very different views, very different than our own. And we believe it's important for us to work hard to defend their ability to make those choices. We refer to that doctrine as moral agency, or the right to choose, and to be left to make those decisions in our own lives. And so underpinning that as children of God and having the right to choose, we believe it's important that we protect this freedom, the freedom of religion, the freedom of conscience, the freedom of human dignity, because it then allows people that right to choose or to pick what they would be. The other doctrine is a shared Christian value, if you will, as Christians. You often hear the golden rule or the two great commandments in Christianity, to love God and to love our neighbor as ourselves. We believe that also, that underlying doctrine, comprises our need to be mutually respectful. If we truly love God, in our minds, we keep commandments. But in addition to that, God has commanded us to love our neighbors as ourselves. This goes back to that first doctrinal foundation of our identity being that as children of God. As we truly learn to love our neighbor, regardless of their choice, regardless of their view, we can learn to support and love each other in our decisions about faith, our decisions about religion, about ideology. And we believe it allows us to live in a very diverse community, a diverse society, but to be very inclusive in our diversity. And by doing so, to us, it's very consistent with our doctrine or our tenets of our faith. In fact, in the early establishment, what we referred to as the Restoration, the early establishment in the early 1800s, our prophet Joseph Smith, that many have heard of before or studied about, he laid down one of the tenets of our faith that we call an article of faith. And here's what he said. He said, "We claim the privilege of worshiping Almighty God according to the dictates of our own conscience, and allow all men and women the same privilege. Let them worship how, where, or what they may." That's what we call our 11th article of faith. But the significance of this comes from the underlying doctrinal foundation I mentioned to you, that we believe it's our responsibility and our duty to protect the freedom of religion, the freedom of conscience. And so you'll see us committed to this well into the future as we look at the future of the Declaration on Human Dignity and Human Rights. We will let you know we will always be a partner in this endeavor. To all of you of different faiths, of different backgrounds, of different civil societies, whatever it may be, you can count on us as a reliable partner well into the future. In our own early beginnings, some of you are well aware, as an early faith in the establishment of the United States, we received heavy persecution that effectively drove us from where we lived and where we sought to establish. And that's how we ended up in what today we call the Western United States, or where our global headquarters are in Salt Lake City. And we teach that to our rising generation, our youth, and we study our history well to understand what happened to us, and most importantly, how we can make sure, or how we can work toward protecting others so those things never happen to them, regardless of their faith or their belief. So with that as our background, as I mentioned earlier, we are committed. We are committed to be partners, to be fellow workers, if you will, for shared values, to express ourselves, to exercise our faith, and to protect others' rights to do the same. Our hope today would be, and my simple message would be, that while there's been a lot of great effort, and we want to thank all those, many who are on this webinar with us today, but yet as we look to the future, to never be discouraged. But it is a bright future. We look in the world today and we still have challenges. We have very significant challenges. But we can make a difference. We can model better society. We can model kindness. We can model true love for each other that will help benefit all and bring us closer to understanding better tolerance, freedom of conscience, and freedom of religion. So we invite all to continue in that endeavor. Count us as a fellow worker, if you will, in this effort. And we hope in the future will be brighter. It won't happen on its own. It will take all of us working together with mutual respect and dignity. And let me just close today, if I might, Francesco and Ryan, of first thanking you and thanking our colleagues, Dr. Ghanea and Dr. Benzo, for participating today, and all those who were on our webinar today for all that you've done, all you will yet do. Let me close in our Christian tradition as we celebrate the Christmas season, to wish you a happy holiday in whatever you do in this time of year. But to most importantly, I hope it's a reflection of broader love and dignity one for another, regardless of our faith, regardless of our religion. A time that the world needs us to be more kind and considerate of each other. And we hope that all feel that during this time of year. Thank you all. Thank you for the privilege to participate with you. God bless you. I look forward to working with each one of you individually in the future. Thank you very much for allowing my participation.
No, thank you very much, Elder Gerard, for your participation this morning. Unfortunately, to all of the people that are assembled into our panelists, Elder Gerard can't stay with us to the end of the webinar due to previous commitments, but I really appreciate the tone that you set today. In particular, I appreciated the "therefore what" comment. I had a boss at one point that would come to staff meetings and he would wear a headband, and the headband would say "so what" on the front of it. So that we would know that it wasn't just like, let's talk about programs, let's talk about activities, but really that everything was leading somewhere. And so now I'm excited to turn to the panelists to get their "therefore what's" in our discussion today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elder Gerard. Ryan, you're right. It's now time to engage with our panel. And I will now give 5 minutes to each Dr. Ghanea and Dr. Benzo for their initial remarks, introductory remarks on the topic. So we'll begin with Dr. Ghanea and followed by Dr. Benzo.
Thank you very much. You asked us to share a little bit about where we're coming from to this topic and why this topic matters to us. I have two hats. Well, maybe I should even say three. I'm a professor in international human rights law at Oxford, and I had the honor of being appointed as United Nations Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief in August 2022, which is an appointment. It's a independent appointment. You're not a staff member of the United Nations, but you seek to serve it. And the thematic area of freedom of religion or belief at the global level. So it's a big charge. It's an unpaid charge, but it's fortunate that there are such wonderful collaborators like yourselves. And I did want to thank Elder Gerard, yourself, Francesco, Ryan, for, when you look at the rising generation of academics and policymakers in freedom of religion or belief, I don't think I've come across anybody who hasn't at some point or another been received in the hospitality, the conferences, the trainings of BYU, LDS, etc. So thank you for supporting the efforts in this area. But also in this mandate, it follows on from 37 years of the international community recognizing that at the very least, we should be able to have somebody who is tasked with reporting to the United Nations on freedom of religion or belief. Freedom of religion or belief is a very live issue in my life. I grew up in Qatar. My parents are Iranian. And I know many friends and their family members who have faced various levels of discrimination. For example, not being able to go to university, not being able to work in the public sector, whose residencies have been terminated, and worse still, a friend whose uncle was tortured and then killed in prison, etc., etc. It's freedom of religion or belief is a live issue. All around us, people are suffering needlessly. And I say needlessly because this is not a natural disaster. It's a human-made disaster that is suffered around the world. And, I think also when freedom of religion or belief is violated, we find that it is violated alongside other human rights. It's rarely a singular violation. So people will be discriminated, they will be targeted, and then a number of human rights violations will follow as a result of them being targeted for their thought, conscience, or religion. And I think when we have this platform, we then need to use it for everybody. And I appreciated Elder Gerard emphasizing that this is a realm of conscience that is to be protected for everybody, irrespective of their thought, conscience, religion, or non-religion. And by protecting the parameters of this, we advance it for everybody in a sustainable way. So regardless of whether somebody is entering belief, changing their belief, having questions about their belief, it is their humanity and the human right to be able to discern these questions that should be protected. I really find one part of a judgment, the first judgment of the European Court of Human Rights that tackled Article 9 or freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, I find very helpful. I mean, this is the European Court of Human Rights. When the first time it tackles this right, it comes up with this observation in paragraph 31 of the Kokkinakis versus Greece judgment from 1993. And it says that freedom of thought, conscience, and religion is one of the foundations of a democratic society. It is one of the most vital elements that go to make up the identity of believers and their conception of life. But it is also a precious asset for atheists, agnostics, skeptics, and the unconcerned. And the unconcerned makes me smile each time, because even for those who feel that they are totally unconcerned about thought, conscience, and religion, this judgment says that it is nevertheless a precious asset for the unconcerned. And it goes on. And it says, the pluralism indissociable from a democratic society which has been dearly won over the centuries depends on it. So I think we should all be mindful of how much the world has suffered to get to this stage of wanting, at least having the framework for upholding this realm of conscience for everybody, irrespective of any distinctions or discrimination. And I think maybe I should stop there and hand the floor over to Ambassador Benzo.
Thank you, Dr. Ghanea. Actually, I can never stop listening to you every time I have the chance to to attend one of your presentations. Dr. Benzo, floor is yours.
Good afternoon. It's indeed great to be among friends and excellent colleagues this afternoon or morning, depending on where we are. And I would like to join Professor Ghanea in thanking the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints for this opportunity. And I would also like to acknowledge the Church's long-standing commitment in promoting FoRB. And I would like to say that you really embody somehow the idea of religious actors that I've been trying to advance during my tenure, which is the idea of religious actors that do not simply call for FoRB or advocate for FoRB for themselves, for their own communities, which is absolutely legitimate and fair, but also call for FoRB for everyone. Showing that FoRB has to be seen as a global asset, as a public good, as a common good, which benefits everyone. So I really like this, let's say, open and comprehensive approach, showing that we are all collectively committed to a common endeavor for the benefit of everyone. I've been in this job for 1 year and a half now. The position of Special Envoy for FoRB promotion and interfaith dialogue at the Italian MFA is a new one. It was established a few months before I was finally appointed on an initiative by the Italian Parliament. The parliamentarians, the members of the lower chamber, approved unanimously a resolution that called for on the government to strengthen our commitment to advance FoRB and interfaith dialogue, including by appointing a special envoy. So what makes my position, let's say, somehow my portfolio somehow broader possibly than the portfolio of some of my counterparts is that I'm supposed to cover, let's say, different layers. So not only the protection and the promotion of FoRB, but also the promotion of interfaith dialogue, the engagement on our side with religious actors and religiously inspired organizations, and I'd also say to try to better understand what we call the geopolitics of religion, how religion interacts with the political landscape, both domestically, so in a certain country, and globally. And personally, I felt there was a lot of synergy between these different layers. I believe that, of course, our priority is to protect and promote freedom of religion or belief. This is a priority that is very closely felt by our government, by our parliament. As I mentioned, it's been present in our daily activity at the MFA. But at the same time, I believe that to promote FoRB more effectively, we need to engage on a regular basis with religious actors, with religious communities, both at the top level and at the grassroots level, with those organizations that, while not being religious in nature, have a religious inspiration in what they do, and with civil society that engages on FoRB. Interfaith dialogue is also a tool that can be very meaningful to advancing freedom of religion or belief. When we speak of interfaith dialogue, of course, we don't mean photo opportunities or high-level meetings that don't deliver anything practical, but again, daily interaction, the promotion of mutual knowledge, mutual respect, which is lacking so badly in many parts of the world, and which ultimately may lead to FoRB violations, precisely because being FoRB alive and the multifaceted right, also challenges can be very diverse, and we need to let's say detect all these challenges and being able to respond to all of them in an effective way. It's excellent that we have an opportunity to, let's say, celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by reflecting on Article 18. And as we all know, anniversaries are not simply occasions to recall something that happened in the past, but also to see what has worked and what has not entirely worked. I wouldn't want to look too pessimistic, but possibly one of the main features of the Universal Declaration that is being under attack today is precisely its universality. So I think that one of our main goals, and again, this should be a collective effort, should be to defend, to promote, to make the universality of human rights better understood in what they actually mean. Because unfortunately, there are claims here and there that possibly human rights are not really as universal as we try to present them. There are some who try to portray human rights as a Western construct or part of a certain agenda. I think we all have the responsibility to stress and stress again the universality of human rights, including FoRB, as the basis, as the best basis on which we can build our efforts for now and for the future. And also, I think that the worst service that we could do to FoRB is to give the impression that it's a niche issue or something for specialists or a problem that only concerns few thousands of people around the world. It's a comprehensive issue. It's a multi-layered, multi-faced issue that needs to be seen in its entirety, in its different manifestations, ramifications. And again, we need to be able to respond to each and every single threat that is posed on a daily basis to FoRB around the world, as no country is entirely immune or safe from FoRB violations. And as we like saying, no religious community is safe until all religious community fully enjoy their freedom of religion or belief. I would probably stop here and engage later in our conversation.
Thank you both to you, Dr. Ghanea, and you, Dr. Benzo, for your remarks. You've definitely set a good stage, a good scene for us to continue this discussion, and I'm excited to do it. So Francesco and I are going to take turns now alternating a few questions for the both of you. I get the privilege of starting. And my first question is for Dr. Ghanea. So during the pandemic, Francesco actually did another webinar focused on freedom of religion or belief in the time of COVID, webinar series, and some of the tensions that happened during that time. You started your mandate shortly at the tail end of the pandemic. And so I'm curious, given your role, given your experience during the pandemic, et cetera, can you share some insights into recent global trends or challenges in the field of FoRB, how the international community is addressing them? Are we back to normal after COVID? Are there new tensions that have arrived in the last year and a half or so? What are you seeing from your vantage point?
Thank you very much. Let me start more broadly and then see whether addressing COVID itself comes up within that. But I think COVID was a very interesting testing ground, which brought into focus the priority we are giving to the life of religious and belief communities at the local level. And sometimes, in many instances, that didn't play out well, so that religious gatherings, religious and belief communities were not allowed their spaces to meet, even though, of course, at a time of heightened pressures, in terms of life and in terms of survival, one can understand that would be a very acute need. Yet they were deprioritized. They were some of the latest spaces to be open. So that already gives us something of a litmus test of the appreciation of really facilitating this human right at the local level. But if I step back more broadly than that, then certainly the activities of civil society actors who are interested and committed to upholding this human rights, they continued. There were many, many sessions. In fact, there were more opportunities to have exchanges on freedom of religion or belief. So that determination is palpable, and the events have, certainly the in-person events have also taken off. And some of these are emerging into transnational advocacy networks. So transnational advocacy networks are those networks that are all the way from the NGO level and the grassroots level and the representatives and voices of the community, all the way to the state actors that can vocalize concern about a human right and try and bring about change. So that chain of connection from civil society and state actors together focused on a common challenge, certainly we see these transnational advocacy networks becoming more solidified or firmer as time goes on. We also have more focused personnel who are dedicated to freedom of religion or belief. In the case of Ambassador Benzo, actually a much broader mandate than that, but nevertheless also including freedom of religion or belief. And we see more and more countries that have freedom of religion or belief as a foreign policy priority. And there are many spaces in which these actors committed to freedom of religion or belief are gathering and re-energizing and touching base and strategizing together. I agree with you, Ambassador Benzo, that we need to make sure that these are not closed spaces of introspection, but are really opportunities to bring more people on board and have broader conversations, not only to the convinced, but also even, as Kokkinakis puts it, to the unconcerned being convinced that nevertheless this human right also matters. So all of these opportunities go alongside much greater tracking, noting, reporting, and observation of violations. The violations are continuing unabated around the world. New victims are found. Hatred that fuels the targeting of people because of their religion or non-religion is morphing and changing and adapting, but it's certainly not reducing. So we need to bring the greater attention to bear more heavily on the violations and to seek to address them, uproot them, ensure that they don't happen. I think the greatest risk factor is polarization. And when the polarization uses religion as its tool, as its narrative, then voices are not even heard. So even basic human empathy is lost, and everybody is just in their own echo chamber, and the voices are becoming louder and more angry, but there's no connection. They're not communication tools anymore because we're just blocked off from one another. And religion or belief, unfortunately, becomes the tool of those who seek to gain primacy and power, and doing so by excluding others or diminishing others. And what are the responses to this? I think by seeking to mainstream human freedom of religion or belief in broader human rights concerns would mean that it has more people taking the challenge on board, and resilience, so that we are able to recognize the risk factors and stand up against them, so that those that are, the hate entrepreneurs that are using religion or belief don't gain traction, they don't gain votes, and they don't gain by using this language of hatred. I don't have sort of a secret solution to all of that, but I hope that lays out some of the grounds or challenges I see.
Thank you, Dr. Ghanea. I have now a question for Dr. Benzo. And as representative of Italy, Italy has been actively involved in promoting freedom of regional belief and interfaith dialogue. And in your position, can you share some examples of successful initiatives or strategies that Italy has implemented to advance these principles that can be, excuse me, that can serve as a model for other countries to follow?
Thank you, Francesco. Well, to start with, I will pick up on a comment that Professor Ghanea has just made. The idea of mainstreaming FoRB into human rights more broadly. And I would say the idea of mainstreaming FoRB into our own foreign policies, and especially development cooperation. So I would like to mention one of our flagship initiatives. It's a fund to support Christian communities in crisis area that was established on an initiative of our parliament in 2019. It has a yearly budget of 4.4 million euros. We've been able to support a number of projects in different countries. It doesn't have a geographical focus simply because FoRB violations don't have, let's say, any geographical boundary, unfortunately. They can arise anywhere. And the idea is that through the support to local Christian communities, we can have a broader and a positive impact on society at large. So by empowering discriminated or persecuted communities, you can make a difference for society at large. So this is the main idea behind this tool. And I would like to stress the link between FoRB promotion and development cooperation, because I think it's not entirely clear to anyone, or not everyone would make a direct connection between FoRB, development cooperation, or economic growth. We should be aware of the fact that any violation of human rights, including FoRB, is an obstacle to growth. Simply because when someone is discriminated against, marginalized, in this case based on their religion or belief, they're not in a position to contribute to the economic, social, cultural growth and development of their own societies. So the society itself gets impoverished, and there is a loss, let's say, of resources for everyone. So the first losers are the states where these phenomena happen. And based on this, a way to respond to FoRB violations is to empower economically, socially, from an educational point of view, those who suffer from discrimination. And that's the rationale behind this tool. Then I would like to mention the fact that beyond flagship initiatives, which are absolutely important and very relevant to our goal, what we have been trying to do is to build a culture of FoRB. So something that goes beyond, again, let's say, the main events or the main schemes, and that, let's say, penetrates our daily work. The problem of FoRB is that, especially in the past, it has been considered as something related to maybe a certain agenda, or being, let's say, advanced by somehow religious people. It has not always been felt as a collective responsibility, or as something that has to do with all what we do in promoting security, stability, growth, development. So what we've been trying to do is to make sure that we work more and more on FoRB, on protecting and advancing FoRB throughout the range of our activities at the MFA and abroad through our network of embassies. And part of this work is to interact on a regular basis with religious or faith-based actors, including because of an information need. If we want to do something to improve the situation of FoRB in a certain country, we need to listen to those who know the matter most, and to listen to those who suffer from FoRB violations on a daily basis. And this is the case of religious actors, members of religious communities, or NGOs active in FoRB promotion. In this way, we always try to involve these kind of players in initiatives that may not have a religious focus. I'm thinking of, I don't know, fields like education, health, environment protection, women or youth empowerment, but that still are relevant to everyone, so are relevant to religious actors as well. And by involving them, we also empower them. We publicly recognize their role in society. And when it comes to communities that are being discriminated, involving them is a way to get them out of the corner where they sometimes are forced to live because of this marginalization I mentioned. So again, I think that the one of the, let's say, added values that we were able to let's say get from this work, from this strand of work, is let's say a more systematic engagement with all those actors that are part of the FoRB picture as a whole, and build this, what I've called the culture of FoRB, as a mindset more than a set of single initiatives.
Thank you. Ryan, if I may just take just a second, because both Dr. Ghanea and Dr. Benzo spoke about the mainstreaming FoRB. And so there was a question in the that someone submitted in the registration, so it's not on the Q&A, and it's from a Montessori teacher. And she's asking, what can be done more to ensure the Declaration of Human Rights is integrated into school curriculum? And so let me add this one also. I've noticed that among the participants, there are a few that are not, or at least from their titles, are not professionals or typical advocates of FoRB. So what can you tell them, what can they do in order to get more acquainted on freedom of religion or belief and to promote the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Article 18 in their own spheres?
Ambassador Benzo, do you want to go first, or shall I say something?
Please go ahead, Professor.
Thank you. There are a lot of resources out there. I had the good fortune of going into a school on Friday and speaking to 2 classes from ages 8 to 10 on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I have to say, it was very refreshing compared to the spaces we're often in. And the energy and the way they connected with it almost seamlessly was just wonderful, which I think also reassures us that there is something in the humanity of each of us that searches for justice and fairness for everybody, and for children that hasn't yet become clouded or burdened. And for the rest of us, hopefully we can go back to childhood in that sense. So there are resources on freedom of religion or belief. Maybe, Francesca, we can share some. There are free courses and introductions and small videos, and there are accessible versions of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that are readily available and translated. And I think it's a great idea to share these. But I do wish more could be done in schools to also feed the next generations that I hope will do much better than us in ensuring these human rights.
Dr. Benzo?
Yeah, I agree that education is key in this regard, and I'm happy to know that we're not only among practitioners. That's very encouraging and goes precisely the direction I was referring to earlier. Education is both a ground where violations can happen and where solutions can be found and built. I always stress the importance of promoting mutual knowledge. In some occasions, FoRB violations arise from the lack of knowledge, from negative stereotyping of members of religious minorities, members of communities other than let's say the main ones. And if we start from youth, if we focus on children, we simply invest in our future. And I think this is the best buffer, the best protection against future violations. These children will be, I don't know, diplomats one day, policymakers, members of parliaments, professors and teachers themselves. Again, to put it very simply, if we promote, again, a culture of FoRB, if we make these ideals, this principle, part of daily curricula, we can more effectively prevent the same problems from happening over and over again. Because I'm convinced that FoRB violations happen where there is a lack of understanding of the value of diversity, of pluralism, and basically a lack of mutual knowledge. And education can definitely is definitely among the main solution to this issue.
Thank you to both of you about that. So leading from that, this idea of education and having people be aware of their rights, there's also, it appears to me sometimes, a proliferation, and this is also drawing on some of the questions in the chat, but there's a proliferation of very specific rights that aren't necessarily universal, right? That sometimes have, conflict, or they detract from the universality of the human right of freedom of religion or belief. In a lot of, and building on that, in a lot of cultural contexts, there may be tension between FoRB and upholding cultural and religious diversity and universal human rights standards, et cetera. So how do we strike that balance between the two of those, Dr. Ghanea? How do we figure out how to respect all these rights at the same time? One of the other questions that kind of goes into this from, where was it? I can't find it right now, but it was a question about extremists and people, using freedom of speech to spew extremist ideology, extremist language, and then counteracting that with FoRB, et cetera. How do we find a balance between all of these tensions between the different human rights?
Thank you very much, Ryan. Perhaps the bar is set quite high. If we look at the 1981 Declaration on the elimination of all forms of intolerance based on religion and discrimination based on religion or belief, this was a 21-year effort by the international community to come up with an instrument that is focused on freedom of religion or belief. So, don't worry about the legal aspects of it. We're trying to be accessible. But nevertheless, the international community struggled for nearly 21 years to come up with this short document. But I think its Article 2.2 is quite helpful. It defines for us, it lays out what intolerance and discrimination based on religion or belief means. And I think I could have tried to share this with the 8-year-olds in the school as well, because it says intolerance and discrimination based on religion or belief means any distinction, exclusion, restriction, or preference. So distinction, exclusion, restriction, or preference based on religion or belief. Now, this can be intended or unintended, but the consequence of it is that it is leading to nullification, so getting rid of, or impairment, so, not fully respecting recognition, enjoyment, and exercise of human rights and fundamental freedoms on an equal basis. In short, we have set up 75 years ago the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a minimum safety net. Hopefully we can exceed it. And indeed, the teachings of many religions ask for us to give generously, to prefer others beyond ourselves, to give to others as we would to our own family, etc. So certainly we should try to exceed it. But as a bare minimum, we want to respect these human rights so nobody's humanity is diminished. And one way in which humanity's equality is diminished is where people are separated, excluded, their rights are restricted, or they are preferred because of their religion or belief above and beyond others. So whether we are using, whatever our culture or background, the international community, after the devastation of the Second World War and the Holocaust, finally came together to sort of record this as a minimum safety net for all of us at all times. We're far short after 70 years of fully respecting it, but I don't think any cultural distinctions can take away from our commitment to these minimum safety nets and to the fact that it is not acceptable to treat others in a way that reduces their possibilities of enjoying at least these minimum human rights. Again, in 1993, in the Vienna Declaration of Human Rights, this was the Second World Conference on Human Rights. The first one was 1968 in Tehran, in Iran. The second one was in Vienna, in Austria in 1993. And, the states of the world are also caught up in which culture is paramount to another. But they agreed in Article 5 of the Vienna Declaration that all human rights are universal, indivisible, and interdependent and interrelated. And that all human rights must be, the international community must treat human rights globally in a fair and equal manner, on the same footing and with the same emphasis. We can't claim freedom of religion or belief in a way that extinguishes freedom of expression. We can't claim freedom of expression in a way that makes it impossible to belong to a religion or belief. These rights are also deeply integrated with one another. There is the right to culture. We have all persons belonging to minorities have the right to maintain their culture, and they might need support in order to do so because they are a shrinking community in a sea of a majority culture, and their language, their culture, their traditions, their religion or belief may be disappearing, and the state needs to be aware of that and be facilitating that. There are positive duties in that regard. But I don't see it, if I can question the question, I don't see it as striking a balance. I think the whole ethos of human rights is we try to maximize all human rights to the highest extent possible in all circumstances. And depending on the circumstances, of course, somebody may need to refrain from laying out precisely what they want done to another community. Rights, the majority of rights are not absolute, except for the ones that, for example, freedom of opinion is an absolute right. The freedom to have a religion or belief of one's choice is the absolute part of the right, in which the state should not interfere in any circumstances, and nor should anybody else. But insofar as things that are expressive and manifested, those rights can be limited, not least because we respect one another, but in human rights terms, the manifestation of religion or belief can't infringe on the rights of others. So they too must be able to enjoy their rights. So obviously they jostle up against one another, but I don't think it's such a simple thing of religion versus culture. Something else that also came up in the Q&A is about promotion. We have the right to seek to persuade others. We have the right to share our beliefs with others, not only in marketing things, but also in sharing matters of truth and belief or rejection of somebody else's claims to truth, okay? This is also a right, but we mustn't do it in a way that makes us, so we mustn't be exploitative about it. It mustn't be in circumstances where the person is locked in and has to listen to you, and their promotion depends on that, or their life depends on that. It shouldn't be under torture or any kind of coercion. But nevertheless, I think we do seek to persuade. Now, sometimes religious beliefs in certain highly secular contexts feel like they are no longer respected, and people feel a diminishment of what was enjoyed and enjoyed respect in the past. So sometimes religious and belief communities are seeking to change the narrative of wider society because they're entirely convinced about it. And they should be able to have voice, and including in public media and in public spaces, to seek to persuade. But human rights is not the tool to force that to happen, to force one cultural position on a matter. It's not through human rights that we do that. It's through persuasion, narrative, engagement, and just seeing what the receptivity to those beliefs are. And so, you know, I'm not saying that human rights will not answer all of those questions, but we are certainly, as members of the human family, sometimes feeling against the stream and wanting to change things. And we have to use all legitimate, respecting tools to seek to persuade others and see what happens.
Thank you so much. And regarding that topic about persuading, right, there was the question specifically addressed towards the missionary efforts of my faith. And really our efforts are in inviting and talking and helping people understand the tenets of our faith, but whether they join or not is entirely up to them. Francesco, I believe you have the next question.
Yes, and I'm actually very excited on how this discussion is evolving, and I think it's the very first time, Ryan, that we don't have to invite questions in the Q&A. We are actually being flooded with questions, and but I do have one question for Dr. Benzo, and you already touched on the connection between promoting FoRB and development cooperation within Italy's efforts. But my question is still on the connection between freedom of religion and belief and the broader diplomatic efforts. So between in the bilateral or multilateral relations between countries. And so how can nations effectively integrate these principles into their foreign policies? Again, you mentioned development cooperations. Are there other policy areas that that nations can work on?
Thank you, Francesco. Well, I think that the key is to fully understand the let's say the scope of human rights in general and FoRB, and understand that promoting human rights is a way to promote stability and prosperity, which should be the main goals of any country's foreign policy. We know that when there are violations of human rights, we'll end up with communities who may feel either resentment or say exclusion, and this could never be, let's say, leading to anything positive. And prosperity is also the result of the participation of everyone on a level playing field to the development, the growth, and the future of a certain society. So I think that for those who understand this point, who accept this point, because probably the problem is not really to understand it, but to accept it as a given, as a reality, For those who accept this point, then it becomes very easy to integrate FoRB protection and promotion within the broader action on foreign policy. Also, I think that, well, first of all, we should say that FoRB is not only a safety net for those who believe, but also for those who do not believe. So this is to stress that it should be a collective effort, because no one is excluded from this endeavor. There are, I mean, it's very hard to find anyone unconcerned. I would say that nobody's really and totally unconcerned by this goal and this endeavor. The idea is that FoRB promotion shouldn't be a purely intergovernmental activity, but rather a broader effort that involves also civil society actors, both religious actors and those who, let's say, don't have a clear religious identity. And why am I saying that? Because again, and here comes again the link with development cooperation, inclusion and equality should be the two main goals that inspire our engagement in promoting FoRB and human rights in general. And a better way to integrate these goals into a country's foreign policy is also to engage more proactively with civil society through a range of options. For example, in my personal experience, I found extremely helpful and stimulating my interaction with the academia. It's not mine, let's say, on a personal basis. We have a scheme for that. We have a funding scheme on a yearly basis to support academic and research centers who work on international affairs. And we've always been trying, and the ministers have always been very keen on this, to always have FoRB interfaith dialogue, the geopolitics of religion among the topics covered by research projects. And this is also a way to get fresh ideas, to get inputs, to get different views. Again, because FoRB is an unfinished job, and it's a never-changing landscape that needs constantly new answers, new perspectives. And then also I would like to stress the idea that we should ensure that religious actors become FoRB promoters themselves. So the idea that countries should work more closely with religious actors because this is a collective endeavor. And I like the reference that Elder Gerard made in his speech at the beginning, when he laid out the religious foundations from the side of the church on FoRB, also showing that FoRB as a religious foundation could be a way to make sure that it is better understood, and that a way to develop a sense of ownership on FoRB by those who are still skeptical and who are still not fully convinced that FoRB is really something that benefits everyone. So I think we should look at FoRB as, of course, as one of the cornerstones of our human rights system, but also as a general principle that has religious foundations, to stress and to make clear that it's, let's say, it's an asset common to all of us and not just to some of us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Benzo. Well, we're now slowly getting to the end of our webinar. We have just a couple of last questions for both of our panelists, and but in the meantime, if we still invite you to submit your questions, if you have anything that comes to your mind, this would be the right moment to type in your questions. So my first question to both Dr. Ghanea and Dr. Benzo, and I would ask Dr. Ghanea to go first on this one, has to do with the evolving landscape of technology and communication. And how do you see the intersection between digital rights, online freedoms, and freedom of religious belief? And do you see challenges or opportunities in this sphere that can be addressed to safeguard these fundamental rights?
Thank you, Francesco. That's a great question. We have soft law standards regarding freedom of expression and freedom of religion or belief more generally, and even they are under tension because states also have vested interests, as do corporate actors and other actors. And they have really, although we have had the Rabat Plan of Action now for 13 years, going on to the 14th year, it hasn't been sufficiently utilized because those vested interests are not fully answered in the Rabat Plan of Action. And sometimes quick accusations and simplistic responses take precedence for different actors. All of that is magnified greatly in the digital space. So the digital space has a magnifying effect, an entrenching effect, and this is the right moment to quickly try to address this gap of an international framework of understandings before generative AI becomes even more active and starts framing the narrative and future generations' thinking, and before it's too late. But I don't know, the states are passing the buck to companies, and the companies don't really have the legal framework to take on this full responsibility, where in any case, agreement has not yet been struck. So, are we or aren't we living in a state-centric world? Somebody said, is the UN organization useless? I don't work for the UN. And at least I can say, if you think it's toothless, it's because it is designed to be toothless in the ways that you see that it's toothless. Okay, so it's not by accident or oversight. So I think the digital sphere brings into focus, are we or aren't we, resting upon states to come to agreement on this, or are we delegating that responsibility to other actors? And another thing that it brings into focus is the lack of literacy, knowledge, awareness, sensitivity on matters of freedom of religion or belief or religion. And I think all of these can play havoc and become much more entrenched and more difficult to overturn if we don't act quickly on addressing these. Because, once the generative AI is, starting the system again is going to be far more difficult than addressing it now.
Thank you. Dr. Benzo.
I would like to join Professor Ghanea's appeal to states and civil society actors in general to engage in a more proactive way on, say, monitoring the development of technology, of AI, and precisely all those, let's say, cases where these new developments may pose challenges to human rights and FoRB in particular. Of course, this is the case in many situations, and we need to make sure that the legal framework is not, let's say, one step behind technological evolution. It's hard because, let's say, the timing of legislation is normally slower than the pace of technology. So we'll always have gaps, but I think we need to make sure that those gaps are as narrow as possible, because we have people on the other side, we have people suffering from, let's say, the violations that stem from the misuse of technology in this case. I think it is vital to effectively monitor the online sphere to prevent the spread of hate speech, which is everywhere by now. Of course, always always respecting freedom of expression, but as Professor Nazila Ghanea mentioned, we have a framework for that. So we have the Rabat Plan of Action and other schemes that help us in drawing the line, let's say, in the right spot. Hate speech can take very different shapes and can be, not always very visible, but it's equally dangerous. And here also comes the reference to education. Education is, I think, one of the main tools to respond to hate speech and to prevent hate speech. And also, of course, we should look at new technologies as drivers, as positive drivers of inclusion, of knowledge, of literacy. And definitely, I think we should all make the best use of these new tools to promote mutual knowledge among people with different religious backgrounds. Also in education, there can be new tools, new schemes to make the access to this kind of information easier and let's say open to also to those who live in let's say developing countries, for example. So access to technology is a way to empower people and to reduce inequalities and exclusion.
Thank you, Dr. Benzo. Our last question for the both of you, and hopefully we'll have some time for some of the Q&A questions too. But this is the 75th anniversary of the UDHR. And so if you're looking forward, if you're forecasting the next 25 years, so in 2048, the 100th anniversary of the UDHR, what would be your ideal situation happening 25 years from now? How do you envision international collaboration? How do you envision, increased education? How do you envision increased, legal frameworks? What would be the three things you would want to see in the next 25 years as we approach the 100th anniversary of the UDHR? Perhaps we can start with Dr. Benzo, since we've started with Dr. Ghanea this entire time, and then move to Dr. Ghanea.
Well, thank you. I think it's one of those kind of $1 billion questions. I was wondering while preparing for this webinar, what if the same text, Article 18, was put to a vote today? Would it be approved unanimously, as that was the case 75 years ago, or not? So probably our main goal should to make sure that the same principles would be, let's say, felt as a common asset and as a common goals by all states also in the future. Because I don't know what the answer would be to this question. Probably more in the negative. So again, I think the ideal situation would be one where the universality of FoRB and of human rights in general is not challenged, and it's part of our acquis, as we say in the European Union. Then, of course, the ideal situation would be one where multilateralism is always the solution to the problems we face. And again, especially in promoting FoRB, I think that fora of like-minded countries are important. It is extremely helpful to compare notes among like-minded countries, as we do in several formats. But also we should invest more on broad coalitions, broad platforms, not to dilute our principles, but on the contrary, to maximize our achievements. And again, to work on these goals in a collective way and through the engagement of everyone, because again, we cannot achieve these goals unless everyone is equally committed, even though this is a very ideal prospect, but still it is the one we should work on, we should keep as the main target for ourselves. And again, I would probably conclude with a note again on education. I would like to see FoRB more present in education, and I would like to see this link between FoRB and education being made more explicit by all countries. We know that basically education is in the hands of national governments or even local governments most of the time. So it's something where probably the international community as a whole can do much beyond stressing the concept and promoting international cooperation and international exchanges in this field. But I think that national, local governments, religious actors, NGOs could really do more in ensuring that education is more and more conducive to peaceful, pluralistic, and inclusive societies.
And Dr. Ghanea?
Thank you so much. Well, 2048 will be at least 3 more mandate holders subsequent to myself, so I don't have to fully worry about this. I do want to draw attention to the fact that there's a digest of the observations of the mandate over the last 37 years on the website. It's very accessible. I hope it might be helpful to you. And my last 2 reports have addressed, looking at the many actors, so the landscape of freedom of religion and belief, then taking it to the grassroots, how freedom of religion and belief is experienced. So, trying to make it real. But 3 things. The first is a refrain. I hope that freedom of religion or belief and religion will not be fodder to the spoilers and the haters in 25 years' time. And if we hollow out the possibilities and the appeal of the exploitation of religion or belief for those who want to exclude, discriminate, and violate the rights of others, or polarize on that basis to get, just to gain ground on another, I think that would be something, at least a negative thing to be won. Secondly, I think our governance structures, continuing from what Ambassador Benzo was saying, likely our governance structures will be more complex in 25 years, as they were, they were simpler 25 years ago, and I think they will continue to become more complex. So non-state actors and their responsibilities, I hope, will be more acutely recognized, and they will be more engaged in a collaborative way with the state actors. And I hope that they are able to act resolutely, both to stamp out the intentional violation of the rights of people because of their religion or belief, but also that the blind spots will be removed. I think we also have many actors that just don't see the freedom of religion or belief violations anymore. And that's a big problem, because it's like the invisibility of freedom of religion or belief violations as a human right. And thirdly, I hope in terms of this lends itself to I hope there will be greater consciousness of the positive role that religion and belief actors and communities can play in advancing human rights and well-being and societal coexistence more effectively, and that we will lean into the cultural changes, the broadening of our own vision. When we consider indigenous peoples and their freedom of religion or belief, it gives us the possibility of widening our horizons. When we sort of think, why is that held so dearly by somebody else? Or how can that be? That gives us an opportunity that I am not them, but I want to respect their right to explore their truth and to live out their conscience to the maximum extent possible. And I think, culturally, we're going in the direction sometimes of simplification and slogans, and these questions require more reflection and perhaps don't always they're not difficult. I think they reach deep into our sense of justice and fairness, but on the other hand, sometimes they don't lend themselves to slogans. But I hope there can be a deeper consciousness around this. A couple of the questions, Professor Garba spoke about the importance of academic institutions, including in Africa, and I want to commend the good work and initiatives he is undertaking in Nigeria and beyond. And Ornella Ulrich asked about whether there are interfaith actors in Luxembourg. And in fact, I know one. So I could put you in touch if you go through Ryan or Francesco. Maybe there'll be a meeting of minds there.
Thank you so much. We have about 7 minutes left. And so we've addressed this a little bit, but I would kind of like to just get one last thought for you. What would be the concrete steps that somebody can take to get into the FoRB space?
I think it must be Ambassador Benzo. As you said, I've been given preference to, and that's just not right. So Ambassador Benzo.
No, not at all. I didn't have this perception. Absolutely. Well, again, I think it very much depends on to what extent we can make FoRB a teamwork. Everybody should feel part of this work of this endeavor. So I think we should break some boundaries that we still have, some misperceptions that we all suffer from, and just open our activity, our work to the contribution of other players. And I think this will, let's say, multiply and magnify our efforts and lead to better results. Again, FoRB is not something done to protect or to let's say, favor those who believe. It is for the benefit of everyone. And I think that the collective nature of this endeavor is the key to let's say, to better success. I think partnerships should be explored in a more convinced way. I've always had the feeling that when the group was larger, where more voices were part of the debate, we were able to get a better perspective of challenges and opportunities. So I really encourage the involvement of all those in the academia, in schools, in culture, in the business, all those who feel they can bring their own contribution. I mean, we're very open to work with them, and I'm sure I can say that also on behalf of my UN, EU, and foreign colleagues. We see that the FoRB family is growing, and this is a very positive thing. I think there is still room for further growth. If we look to some sectors that have not been part of the picture so far, but have the potential to do so. I'm thinking, for example, of the private sector. There can be much synergy between what we do and what the private sector does, especially if we consider that corporate social responsibilities is becoming a strategic sector for most companies. So again, I think that the partnerships can really help us bring our work to a further level and make some, that extra mile that is always missing.
Any last thoughts, Dr. Ghanea?
Well, it depends who we are and where we are, but wherever we are, I think we can take action here. Our city can be twinned with a city whose people are suffering because of religion or belief, that can become a bridge to engagement on a number of issues, including on this. We can reach out to someone who is suffering. We can send an email or a postcard for somebody who is in prison because of their religion or belief. We can remember them at the next town hall meeting and say that we are concerned about them. And the more distant they are from where we are in our thought, conscience, and religion, the more exciting that is, because freedom of religion or belief is not only an outward oriented project, it's an opportunity for us to explore our own unconscious bias and go beyond our comfort zone. And in carrying out freedom of religion or belief, hopefully we embody our values, that it's not only what we are achieving, it is how we are achieving it. So can we respect our values whilst trying to pursue our ends? Because I think that would be the way that would resonate most with this freedom. And if it's on a more formal basis, then yes, there are these, I hope you've received some of these toolkits. You can just do a quick Google. In fact, they're available in many languages. There are many accessible materials. Maybe we can take it to the local school, discuss it with our grandchildren or our neighbors' children. And more formally, Faith for Rights is another platform in which to engage with debate with a variety of actors and to find the common grounds with those that are vastly different to us, to encourage our municipality to respect freedom of religion or belief, to engage in interfaith dialogues. They're hard, interfaith dialogues were not the most challenging arenas in the past. They were comfort zones, but now they are really under a lot of pressure. And perhaps we can, help to be the glue to keeping these groupings together.
Thank you so much to both of you for all of your thoughts and insights and wisdom that you imparted today. I have to say this is one of the most engaging panels that I've had on FoRB in my time working with the United Nations. And I've moderated a lot of the other ones too, but so it's not because of me, obviously, but you both, it was fantastic. I really appreciated everything that you had to say today. So I want to express my gratitude to you. I want to express my gratitude to everybody that participated today online. Francesco, do you have any last thoughts?
I do. Thank you, Ryan. And again, I also wanted to share how happy I am for the outcome of this webinar, for the content that was shared and the interest that we saw through the Q&A. But I couldn't help but keep looking back at this phrase on one of the questions from the Q&A box, where Ornella said, "I am a simple stay-at-home mom." And I don't think there is anything such a simple stay-at-home mom, looking at what my wife does. But what I've been thinking by listening this webinar, but also this thought that freedom of religion belief is a universal human rights, but is also an individual right. We keep saying that is individual, and I've been thinking that there is no place better than a home where people and individual can start learning about these things. And so to all of the stay-at-home moms in this webinar, please keep in mind that your role is very important, but also generates an idea that probably organization not only could start thinking of resources for schools, but also resources for parents, so that this topic can start being taught to children as well in the warmth of a home. So I think, Ryan, we'll do some homework in trying to gather some of these resources in the summary of this episode, and we look forward to share these in the follow-up.
Thank you, Francesco. On behalf of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and our panelists, once again, I thank everyone for joining us in this discussion. We look forward to your continued engagement in future events as we delve further into the promotion of human rights and particularly the advancement of freedom of religion or belief. With the Christmas and holiday seasons approaching, we also wish everyone, regardless of their faith tradition, a joyous and peaceful season ahead. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Bye.